Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have something for you a little different today. And it's important to note that this show is called Nightfall Audiobooks, and I should be covering other authors and not just R.L. Stine all the time. And this time I have for you Mickey Zucker Reichert. She has been on my wanted-to-do list for a very, very long time. She wrote the Bifrost Guardians, Volumes 1 and 2. I'm a big fan. I am a huge fan of Bruce Campbell and the Evil Dead series. And Army of Darkness is my favorite Bruce Campbell movie of all time. It's a very, very good fish-out-of-water story. You have a modern man stuck in medieval times trying to solve problems, and he's learning how to cope because he's used to doing things the modern way. So how does he accomplish his goals now without gasoline and cars and things like that? This is sort of the same idea. This is about a man named Al Larson, and he is a Vietnam soldier, and before he dies, he calls out to the Norse god Vidar, which is the god of peace, and Vidar listens, and he picks up Al Larson's soul and brings him back to medieval times. So this idea is much the same as Army of Darkness. You have a modern man in medieval times trying to solve problems. So it gets a little funny because he uses things like, man, that horse is the size of a Buick, and everyone around him is like, well, what's a Buick? And he has to explain. This is a series of 5 books. I have been wanting to reread this set for a very, very long time. I can't remember when I was introduced to this. I know my dad used to work the night shift, and he would get books a lot and read because on the night shift there wouldn't be a whole lot for him to do, so he would fill his spare time with books sometimes. And he brought this home, and I read it, and I fell in love with it, and now I have it in my possession. I am reading this to you from the omnibus. This will be read to you from the page, so if you hear my thumbs sliding across the pages, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. So the other reason why I've been putting this off is because I don't like Book 2. I really, really enjoy Books 1, 3, 4, and 5, but 2 I don't really care about. Book 2 is it's essentially Prince of Persia. It's a spoiled prince who is out thieving and running around town on the rooftops and stealing things for fun because he's completely bored at home being a prince. I don't care for his story. I read the story for Al Larson and for his stuff, and he is nowhere present in the second book. And that's why I don't like it. Truth be told, when I sit down to reread a series, I will start from the beginning and obviously end at the end, and I don't really skip books. When I sat down to read Mark Anthony's The Last Rune series, which is phenomenal by the way, that is 8 novels long, and it took me 2 years to read that straight, back to back to back to back, straight through. I read nothing else but The Last Rune series, and I didn't skip a book because every word of that is magical. But when I sit down to read the Bifrost Guardians, I always stop somewhere in the middle of Book 2 because it's just so damn boring and I don't care about it. So that means that I forget entirely what happens in Books 3, 4, and 5. Book 5, I mainly know what happens, I remember how the story ends, and it's awesome. This is an expertly well done, fish-out-of-water Norse mythology story. It is fantastic. If this is your bag and you like fantasy as much as I do, this is something that you should really pay attention to. These books aren't very popular anymore. You can get them probably under $10 for the set on abebooks.com or eBay or something like that. I highly, highly recommend these. Every book except for Book 2 is an 8 out of 10. So let's begin. Please write me an email with any suggestions or comments that you might have. nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I also have a Patreon page at patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Bifrost Guardians, Book 1, Godslayer, by Mickey Zucker Reichert. Prologue. I who fashion myself a sorcerer or an angel, who dispense with all morality, I have come back to the earth. Arthur Rimbaud. Adieu. The 3 mailed guards who ushered Brahmin into the king's court regarded him with cautious curiosity. No one dared touch him, nor did they question the cloth parcel which swung from his belt. Offending any wizard could spell instant death, and the jade stone clamped in the black-nailed claw which tipped Brahman's staff identified him as a sorcerer of high rank. As they passed through the double set of oak doors, Brahman fought to keep his head high. The battle he had just survived and the enchantments of transport weakened him both mentally and physically. His aura had dulled to a flicker of gold, and though he had nothing to fear in Ashimir's throne room, he hoped the king's magician would not recognize his fatigue. It was simply a matter of pride. The carpeted path to the king's throne seemed to stretch for miles. The court watched the procession in a vast silence which jagged Brahman's already taut nerves. A kama of black hair slipped into his eye, and he flicked it back with an anger that sapped much of his remaining strength. Weakness of any sort enraged Brahman, and it reminded him of his reckless squandering of power. Overconfidence had cost many of his colleagues their lives. "Step forward and name yourself." King Ashimir's command broke the silence, and tense whispers followed it. Ire rose momentarily at this ritual formality. The king knew Brahman well. The magician had been born and raised in the royal city, the product of a rape. His father was one of the dark elves, the last fairy creature seen in this part of the world. As a child, Brahman paid for his willowy figure and dark complexion with jeerings and ridicule. Brahman came forward unhurried. He nodded briefly at the advisor beside the king, glared at the court sorcerer, who regarded him with both envy and amusement, and bowed pleasantly to the king. "I am Brahman, dragon rank of the Jade Claw." He thumped the base of his staff on the floor for emphasis. "I have performed your quest. The giant, Red Soul, lies dead at my hands." He thumbed the sack at his belt. Enervation and anxiety caused him to misjudge position and strength, and the tie snapped. The bag fell to the floor, and the giant's head rolled free to the king's feet. King Ashimir recoiled with a gasp. The court sorcerer turned an unbecoming shade of green. Behind Brahman, strained whispers broke to cries of fear and amazement. Guards scrambled to maintain order. Others ran for the abomination which seemed to stare at their king with glazed eyes. With a word and a gesture, Brahman caused the head to slide back into its bag. The effort slammed against him like a wall, stealing his breath. His life aura flickered dangerously. A high-pitched ringing filled his head, making the voices around him seem distant. Yet Brahman retained control over his languished muscles. Gradually, his mind cleared and he cursed himself brutally. He could have let the guards clear his mistake away, or physically done so himself. Pride alone goaded him to recklessness, and he had nearly paid his price. The king cleared his throat. His look of fear dissolved, masked by a pleasant smile. "You've earned your reward, Brahman half-man. 5 chests of gold, a parcel of land, or the hand of my daughter, Halfreda. The choice is yours." The pronouncement of Halfreda's name made Brahman smile despite his exhaustion and indignation. "I need neither money nor power, for I have both already, but for Halfreda's hand, I would stop the sun from setting and the moon from rising. I would still the tides, or steal the hammer of Thor." The court passed opinion in a gentle hum of conversation. The king bit his lip against an ecstatic grin, but his blue eyes gleamed with excitement as they met Brahman's glowing red glare. The court sorcerer looked stricken. All 3 men knew Brahman would need to abandon the school of dragon rank, since one of its primary requirements was 11 months per year of training on the school's grounds. For the king, it meant a new court magician with power beyond any of his predecessors. Only those blessed with the claw symbol could join the dragon ranks. Its devotees were the most capable users of the art, and the most able among them became omnipotent lords or directly served gods. "Summon Halfreda," Ashimir commanded his guards. They rushed to obey. Brahman knew marriage would force him to sacrifice a future of ultimate power for domesticity and the banality of court proceedings. He lowered his head, staring at the claw-shaped scar which puckered the black skin on the back of his right hand. The symbol had appeared at the age of 10, along with the first traces of the life aura which glimmered about him, visible only to those versed in magic. His mother and human half-siblings sent Brahman away that year, so he traded the jibes of the citizens of Forstmar for their respect and the grueling discipline of the dragon rank. A person marked with the claw was a rare enough occurrence in any town, and Forstmar received its second surprise 3 years earlier. Brahman's eldest half-sister Silm was similarly stamped by destiny. She joined the dragon rank, which pleased Brahman. It gave him a familiar companion on his infrequent breaks from studying enchantments or practicing swordsmanship. And he had always liked Silm best, Many times she had tried his tears or soothed his deadly rages when children grew cruel with their taunts, or citizens wounded his pride with derision. The door swung open, interrupting his memories, and the court fell silent again as the guards ushered Halfrida before them. A dress of blue silk with interlacing patterns of silver tastefully outlined her delicate frame. Her face was fair with artistically high cheekbones. Her wide, set eyes were the pale blue of cornflowers. At the sight of the lady he loved, all other thought fled Brahman. His heart pounded, pumping warmth and desire through his body. He stared without speaking, love-blinded to her taut-lipped pall of fear. The king rose from his throne. Brahman Jadeclaw, you see my daughter, the Lady Halfrida. On Midsummer's Day, I sanction the marriage between you. May you live long together and prosper. Halfrida opened her mouth to speak, but her words were lost beneath the cheers of the crowd. As Brahman turned his back to the king and trod the walkway toward Halfrida, she shrank back. Her hands clenched to his bloodless fists, and her soprano pierced the dying shouts of the court. "Wait!" Brahman stopped before her trembling form. "I would test your love," she announced shrilly. "It is my right." Breath broke from Brahman in an angry hiss. He had risked his life for her once, and would gladly do so again. But her entreaty was an affront. While it was indeed her privilege, no princess had invoked the law since its enactment 3 centuries past. Halfrida continued, "You must fight a champion of my choosing to the death in the arena at mid-morn. Should you survive, my hand is yours." She shivered, and her voice acquired a strange, droning quality. "You may select your weapon, but use of sorceries or enchanted swords will free me from my promise." Struck to the heart by the maliciousness of her challenge, Brahman dropped all pretense of dignity. He knelt before Halfrida with the true respect he had denied the king. "As you wish, my lady. May the court hear my vow to kill or be killed by your champion, without use of magic." Halfrida's mouth twitched to a cruel smile which swiftly disappeared. Stiffly, Brahman turned. Vague hopelessness wove a black curtain across his vision. As he retreated along the carpeted walkway, he stumbled, and the glares of courtiers sapped him of all remaining grace. It seemed an eternity before he reached the far end of the hall. A guard swung open the carved oak doors, and Brahman passed through them. The portals clanged closed behind him, silencing the whispered condemnations of Ashimir's court as completely as death. Outside, wind flung strands of matted hair into Brahman's face as if to mock him. Despair rose to self-pity, then flared to righteous anger. His journey through the familiar streets of his childhood seemed as one through a tunnel. The dirt roads blurred to a dark obscurity of disinterest. Peasants stared or scuttled from his path unnoticed. A horse-cart driver hurled epithets at the dark sorcerer who paced the cobbles at the center of the alley. But at a flick of Brahman's hand, the driver stemmed his tide of oaths and swerved to a roadside ditch. "They fear me." For the first time since he had left to kill the giant, Brahman smiled with cruel satisfaction. "My life aura has dwindled to nearly nothing, yet those who once scorned me now shy from a gesture. Still, for Halfrida's love, he would weather the jibes of peasants gladly." The setting sun lanced red light through the guttering remnant of Brahma's aura. Utterly alone in his fury, despite the dispersing throng of Forsmar's citizenry, he plodded to his mother's home. He opened the simple plank door, stepped across its threshold, and slammed it closed behind him. Despite his effort, the portal slid shut with an impotent click which betrayed his weakness. Rage flared anew. Despite the death of Brahman's stepfather several months earlier, the cottage had changed little since his childhood. The sod-chinked walls enclosed a simply furnished room separated from his mother's bedchamber by a patched blue curtain. Silm sat before a blazing hearth fire, a tomcat nestled in the folds of her robe, while a brother and sister begged stories of distant lands and dragon rank training. As Brahman entered, his mother rose from a chipped wooden bench, her youngest child cradled to her breast. "Brahman?" Brahman gave no explanation. He spared neither glance nor words for the mother and half-siblings who followed his march to the loft ladder with questioning stares. Anger lent the sorcerer strength. He caught the lowest rungs in calloused palms and climbed to his sleeping quarters, with a deliberateness designed to override fatigue-inspired clumsiness. Once in the loft, he pitched onto a pallet, oblivious to the bells and balls left by the child who occupied this bed since Brahman's departure to pursue the skills of dragon rank. Tears burned his eyes. Repeatedly, his fist pounded the pillow, scattering straw among the toys. Behind Brahman, the latter groaned. Silm's sweet voice wound through the loft. "Brother, are you well?" Brahmin whirled like a cornered beast, inappropriately his malice channeled against the half-sister who had comforted him in youth, the one woman he knew would not condemn him. "Nothing's changed, Silm. The citizens of Forsmar still hate me. Halfrida spurns my love." He struck the pallet again. "Stop!" Silm's voice grew uncharacteristically harsh. "Before you embed your soul in self-pity and accuse me of lying, tell me what happened in Ashimir's court." Brahmin sucked air through pursed lips, then exhaled in a long sigh. He recounted the scenario in the king's presence, his overwhelming exhaustion, Ashimir's eager determination, and Halfrida's cruelty. As he concluded the tale, he surrendered to the cold grip of hopelessness. His words emerged in a thin whine. "While vestiges of dignity remain, I must leave Forsmar and never return. I cannot bear the sight of Halfrida's beauty, knowing her love will never belong to me." Silm lowered herself to the pallet beside her half-brother. She squeezed his knee reassuringly. "Don't talk that way, Brahmin. Your loves are intense. Your hatreds fester. In youth, you would damn all children for a single taunt and despise every man of Forsmar for a glare. Now, Brahmin, would you condemn yourself to exile to avoid a challenge?" "A challenge?" Brahmin shook free from Silm's grip. "Halfrida degraded me by calling upon a privilege rejected for centuries. Even Queen Agneti, who wrote the law, never invoked it for herself or for her daughters." Silm's reply came as soft as a cat's purr. "But Halfrida knew you could fulfill it." "What?" Silm framed a smile of triumph. "Halfrida doesn't hate you. For the last decade you have trained in a distant land 11 months of the year, yet Halfrida never married in your absence." Brahmin scowled unconvinced. Silm rose from the pallet and knelt before Brahmin. She caught his hands. "Here a woman is judged by the worth of her man. She must make certain her husband can protect her from bandits and raiders." Silm's blue-tinged aura dwarfed Brahmin's, so dimmed was it with exhaustion. The jade-rank sorcerer grunted. "You know I can." Silm concurred. "I know, but magic seems more alien to Halfrida than the sharp, dark features and red-hued eyes she has learned to accept. She understands swordplay." Brahmin wavered. Silm pressed. "Who is the best warrior in this town?" "Me?" Silm stood. "We both know none of Ashimir's knights can defeat you. Halfrida knows it too." As anger dispersed, fatigue crowded Brahmin. Though Silm's explanation seemed implausible, his desire for the princess allowed him to believe it. "Then why?" Silm interrupted. "Because she's insecure. She needs to justify your appearance by displaying your talents in public. Do you find Halfrida's hand more valuable than the life of a soldier?" Realization drove Brahmin's voice to a whisper. "Far more." He sprawled across the pallet, drained of all emotion except for the early fine stirrings of hope. As Silm crept back to the ladder, sleep overtook him. Yet despite his half-sister's reassurances, the memory of Halfrida's fleeting sneer haunted Brahmin's dreams. Rest restored the vitality drained by Brahmin's battle with the giant. As he dressed in a simple tunic and breeks, many thoughts plagued him. As skilled with a sword as with magic, Brahmin knew from his 1 month a year at home that no warrior of Forsmar could best him. Unless some strange and highly capable swordsman had joined them in the past year, he could not be defeated. Brahmin fastened his sword belt and drew the blade from its leather hip scabbard. He smiled as the radiance of his restored life aura bounced blue highlights from the steel. He felt strong, mentally and physically. Striding from his mother's cottage, he let the door swing shut behind him and trotted through the streets to the cleared patch of castle grounds. Guards passed cautiously about him, attentive to their duties. With magically enhanced hearing, Brahmin invaded their conversations, but the sentries seemed as curious about the princess's champion as he himself. Brahmin executed an elegant series of sword feints. The hilt felt comfortable in his grip, metal wrapped with rough leather, which would not slip from his sweat-slicked palm. He stopped, not wishing to tire himself before the match. His love for Princess Halfrida had begun as a childhood crush. He sent flowers and trinkets, though she acknowledged none of them and regarded him with the same scorn as the other citizens of Forsmar. Her reluctance only strengthened his passion. During the vacations from the school of dragon rank, he wooed her. Soon his love became an all-encompassing desire. The sun shouldered over the horizon. Citizens drifted toward the southern side of the castle grounds, where the arena towered over the quartets of guards and servants. Finely dressed courtiers strode in regal pairs. Peasants in warm homespun crowded toward the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the combatants. Armored guards tried to maintain some order in the milling chaos with little success. From habit, Brahman checked his own excitement. As he walked toward the arena, he took his staff in hand. It would help him through the throng. The men rightly shied from its touch. He used it like a walking stick, though none would question his youth or vigor. Even those too foolish to fear the power of his magic could not fail to notice the unearthly aura of evil inherited from his father. The citizens of Forsmar shrank back from the slim, dark wizard who strode purposefully to the door of the stadium. Despite the demoralizing inevitability of combat, Brahman gleaned some amusement from their awe. Years ago, these same men and women would have spit on him. The guards gestured Brahman inside, and a crowd closed in behind him, hoping for a glimpse of the combat. Noblemen lined the balconies and applauded politely at his entrance. Brahman leaned his staff against the lowest stands, walked to the center ring, and examined his audience. He raised a hand in greeting to the king and queen. Ashimir waved, then shrugged in apology. Halfreya's seat was unoccupied, and Brahman supposed she was coaching her champion. The thought formed a painful ball in his throat. He felt utterly alone. Now, before Forsmar's masses, Silm's reassurances rang as hollow as in youth, when she swore her playmates did not hate him, even as they hurled rocks and challenges. Anxiety allowed Brahman to forget the times she had stroked his hair until he ceased to tremble. He knew nothing of how she had confronted his tormentors with their inhumanity, and made them blush with humility. Thus reminded of the townspeople's hostility, Brahman's will faltered. The noise of the peasants changed pitch. The door swung open, and Halfreya entered. She wore a suit of leather far too large for her tiny frame. She grasped a long sword in both fists, and it leaned awkwardly. The audience erupted in riot. The queen fainted. All color drained from the king, and he sat rigid like an ivory statue. Brahman met Halfreya halfway into the ring. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Her eyes blazed with madness. "I am my champion. Kill or be killed," she chanted like a priest before a sacrifice. She thrust the sword clumsily. Brahman's mouth went painfully dry. He sidestepped and caught both of Halfreya's wrists, drawing her too close for combat. If anyone in the audience spoke or moved, Brahman did not notice. His blood-colored eyes probed the princess for answers, but true to his word he avoided magic. "Halfreya," she spat in his face. "Beast, I would rather die than marry you." Halfreya's words pained like blows. Brahman's grip tightened on her flesh till she winced. His voice was rambling and plaintive as a lost child. "Why? Oh, why, Halfreya? I've the power to grant your every desire. 1,000 kings have offered great treasures for me, to come serve them. Yet I refuse them all for you. I love you, Halfreya." Halfreya's hands whitened as her face flushed with ugly rage. "I'll not be disdained by my own people because a dark creature loves me," she added cruelly, "if indeed your kind can know love." Brahman caught his breath with a sob. "Now I know love and pain." Desperately, he spouted Silm's trite comforts as if they were truths. "The people of Forsmar don't hate me. They mistreated me as a child from ignorance, but many years have passed since—" "You stupid animal!" Halfreya's voice rose in pitch and volume. "We hate you now more than ever. We would kick and spit, even slay you if we didn't fear your power. You're no man, you're a beast. Worse than a beast, for a rat is content with its lot, and you have the audacity to pretend you're human." Slapped by Halfreya's cruelty, Brahman made a pained noise. His grip went lax. "Halfreya." Her sword struck. Though too near her target for an effective strike, her blade nicked Brahman's side. The razor edge opened his tunic. Blood beaded his side. Brahman watched in fascination as a single drop slid down his breeks and splashed a tiny scarlet circle in the sand. He looked up as Halfreya raised her sword like a club and lashed at his face. Tears stung his eyes. He stood hopeless and uncaring as the blade cut above his head. Just before the blow fell, self-righteous fury warmed his blood. The will to live and claim vengeance on all who had ever wronged him replaced the anguish roused by Halfreya's scorn. He sprang aside. Her sword whisked through air where he had stood and hammered the packed sand with a crash. Off balance, Halfreya staggered. Brahman caught her by the throat. He drew her so close their faces nearly touched. Her cheeks and eyes paled with fear, which gave Brahman a morbid satisfaction. The legacy of his dark ancestors rose hot in his veins. "Too good for me, lady?" His voice transformed to an ancient croak of evil. "You're not too good for death." His hands knotted convulsively, cartilage crumpled beneath his fingers, and Halfrida fell limp against him. Blood trickled from the corner of her thin lips, staining Brahman's hand. He looked up quickly to a condemning horde. A great shout rose from the stands, and men descended upon him. "Stop!" screamed Brahman. His cry was lost in the rising din. Clutching Halfrida's body with one arm, he raised the other. Spell words rushed from his throat. His life aura flared to blinding white. Smoke broiled from his fingers and rolled like fog across the arena floor. It struck the first wave of courtiers and roared to flame. Screams filled Brahman's ears like song. The courtiers' charge was transformed to chaotic flight. Enchantments rolled from the half-elf's tongue. Brahman's staff leapt from his hand. Its jade stone winked once, staining the roiling magics in eerie green-blue. And when the works of sorcery cleared, all that remained of Brahman and Halfrida were 5 drops of blood on the sands of the arena. Stiffly, Halfrida let the last of her garments fall to the floor of Brahman's quarters at the School of Dragon Rank. She stood before him, naked. He had imagined her unclothed so many times in his dreams and desires, yet now the sight only sickened him. Her slimness transformed to a cadaverous frailty. Her breast sagged, violet with pooled blood. Her eyes were hollow and dead. All his magic could not restore life, only simulate it. This was not Halfrida, just a crude animation which would perform as Brahman wished, without will or knowledge of its lot. Black rage engulfed Brahman. His life aura rose to off-white as he channeled his energies. Magic lanced Halfrida's body as it fell, and the pale form crumbled to dust. Bitterness grew like a cancer. Brahman rose and paced. With each jagged pass, his fist crashed against the smooth stone walls. "Hate me, do they?" he screamed at the ceiling. "Hate spawns hate." He stared at the charred pile which had once been the person of the Princess of Forsmar. One kick scattered the ashes around his quarters. "Hate spawn I am, and so I will remain. But all mankind shall pay for their abhorrence." His thoughts shifted slightly. For a moment he pictured his half-sister Silm, as beautiful as Halfrida and in as many ways as cruel. Brahman paced again. "It was she who told me they meant no harm. She blinded me to their treacheries and laughed behind my back. She taught me the torture of love as though it were a pleasure and held me from my vengeance. She goaded me to destroy my love and shame myself before Forsmar's peasants. It's too late to sunder Halfrida's soul, but not Silm's. She will die in torment and the man-world of Midgard with her." Light flashed through his quarters, dimming his life aura to dirty yellow as another's power pulsed against him. Brahman turned with a hiss. Before him stood a man more beautiful than the woman he had loved. Fine gold locks fell to his shoulders. His dark blue eyes twinkled with cruel mischief. He wore a strangely tailored costume, interwoven with magics which shimmered as he moved. Arms folded across his chest. The stranger stared at Brahman with a grin of arrogant scorn. "Die, human!" screamed the half-man. Power streamed from his fingers, slowed, and fizzled to sparks a foot before the handsome stranger. The man laughed sweet as rain. "Very pretty, Hatespawn, but you've much left to learn." Brahman glared. "Who are you?" The stranger yawned, and his shirt sparkled so it nearly blinded Brahman. "I am called by many names." He chuckled. "Some even I am too polite to speak. I am Loki, first father of lies, thief of Brisingamen, evil companion of Odin, slanderer and cheat of the gods, and father of the Fenris wolf." Brahman's scowl wilted. His throat went dry and he swallowed several times before attempting speech. "A god? But why?" "Did you mean your threats, Hatespawn?" Loki frowned accusingly. "Or were they the idle ramblings of self-pity? Decide quickly. I don't waste time with fools." Anger blazed anew. Brahman's fist clenched so tightly his fingernails bit red welts in the palms. Though sorely embittered, he chose his words with care. "I never speak idly. I will cause the downfall of man." The corners of Loki's mouth twitched upward, and his voice lilted. "And the gods as well, if you will serve my cause." Brahman started. "Gods have enlisted the aid of high-clawed dragon rank, but I am only jade. Why me?" "Because, Hatespawn." Loki's inflection almost made the title sound pleasant. "You will rise quickly through the ranks. Already the master prepares your staff for Garnet, and you take your swordplay as seriously as your magic. I've use of that." Brahman focused on the shimmering patterns of Loki's shirt. "It will still take time," he said solemnly. I've plenty of it, Loki grinned wickedly. And so have you. It would be wise for us both to learn patience. Brahmin scowled, saying nothing. Loki continued, Save your vengeance. I've something for you to remember our bargain in the meantime. The god bowed his head and his golden hair fell about his cheeks like waterfalls, obscuring his face. His hands crossed before him, fingers spread. Slowly, he drew his hands apart as he uttered sharp, harsh syllables of summoning. Loki's fingers curled. Suddenly, his wrists flicked outward. A globe of blackness winked into place before him, marred only by the silver lines of sorcery from Loki's shirt and Brahmin's aura. The ball stretched to a rod-like shape and dropped into Loki's hands. It was a sword. Loki raised his head. Take it. Brahmin bit his lower lip. Hesitantly, he took a step forward and met Loki's eyes. They were chill blue with the same contempt of the men of Forstmar. Anger made the half-breed more confident. He strode forward and seized the sword. Its sheath was carved ebony. Its hilt was split leather wrapped steel studded with fire opals, and it fit Brahmin's hand comfortably. With a quick pull, he freed the blade, slim and silver, polished so fine its glow mocked enchantments. Near its hilt, runes flickered, effused with red light. For a moment, their meaning was clear to him. Then they muddled to obscurity, and his memory of them as well. Brahmin muttered a spell in frustration, but the writings remained just beyond comprehension. What does it say? He demanded, hating his inability. Loki smiled. It's the sword's name, Helblindi, and its purpose. Your vengeance begins when the writings become clear to you. Know only that men will flee from your blade, and the braver the man, the more he must fear it. Helblindi. Brahmin raised his brows in question. Isn't that the name of another god? Very perceptive, Hellspawn. Very perceptive. As suddenly as he had arrived, Loki was gone. All that remained was a rumbling of laughter which echoed between the walls.